January 2026, the Persian Gulf. The board is set, the pieces are moving. If you listen to the press briefings from the Pentagon, the United States has already achieved strategic dominance. They point to the Northern Arabian Sea. They show you the USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-77, the Scalpel, the carrier equipped with the F-35C Lightning II. They tell you that fifth-generation stealth has locked down the airspace. Then they point to the ground. They show you Operation Agile Spartan. The United States Air Force has deployed the 494th Fighter Squadron to the region, the F-15E Strike Eagles, the heavy hitters. The trucks carrying 23,000 pounds of ordnance each. On paper, the equation looks balanced. You have the invisible ghost in the air. You have the brute force on the ground. The media calls this a perfect deterrent. But here at Navy Decoded, we do not look at press releases. We look at the math. And when you run the logistics calculus on this perfect deterrent, it collapses. There is a fatal flaw in this formation, a gaping hole in the sustainment logic that no one is talking about. Look at the F-15E. It is the king of the sky. Yes, but it is a slave to the ground. It requires a fixed runway. It requires concrete infrastructure in Qatar or the UAE. In 2026, against an adversary like Iran, a fixed runway is not an asset, it is a target. Iranian ballistic missile doctrine is built entirely around runway denial. If the conflict goes kinetic, those airbases are erased in the first 10 minutes. If the runway is gone, the F-15E is nothing more than a museum exhibit. Now look at the Lincoln. It survives because it moves, but it fights with the F-35C to maintain stealth, to be the scalpel. The F-35 must carry its weapons internally. Physics dictates geometry. The internal bays are small. They cannot carry the volume of fire required to dismantle a nation-state's infrastructure. The Lincoln is excellent for the day one strike, but what happens on day 7? What happens when the war turns into a grinding attrition fight? The Lincoln runs out of punch. The Air Force runs out of runways. The United States runs out of options. To solve this equation, we don't need another miracle jet. We need a ghost from the Atlantic. Right now, steaming east from Norfolk is the variable X. The USS George H.W. Bush, CVN-77. The Pentagon has not officially confirmed it is joining the Lincoln. They call it routine training. Do not believe the handshake. The math demands this ship's presence. It is the inevitable solution to the logistics gap. But this ship brings something that the Lincoln does not. It brings a soul. This ship carries the name of the only president who was shot down in combat and survived to lead the nation. It carries the ghost of a 20-year-old pilot drifting in the Pacific Ocean. 1944, bleeding but unbroken, refusing to surrender to the sea. That is the DNA burned into the steel of CVN-77. It is the spirit of resilience. It doesn't glide, it stomps. It doesn't hide in the shadows, it owns the horizon. This ship was not built for politicians, it was built for pilots. Its call sign is Avenger. It carries the spirit of a man who knows what it feels like to dive into anti-aircraft fire. But while the soul is perfect, the body is broken. CVN-77 is the black sheep of the fleet. It is the 10th and final ship of the Nimitz class, but it is not a Nimitz, not really. It is a Mutant. It is a transitional platform, caught between the proven engineering of the past and the experimental physics of the future Gerald R. Ford class. And like all experiments, it has a defect, a structural scar. CVN-77 fights a congenital list due to the radical displacement of the bulbous bow and the shifted island. The ship has a natural, permanent tendency to roll to starboard. So, how did the Navy fix this multi-billion-dollar drift? Did they redesign the hull? No, that was too expensive. They chose the brute force solution. They didn't just rely on pumping water. Fluid is unstable. Instead, they performed corrective surgery. Deep in the bowels of the ship, on the port side keel, engineers installed hundreds of tons of solid ballast. We are talking about massive blocks of dead weight, pig iron and lead, welded permanently into the voids. Think about the physics of that. To make the bush effective, they had to intentionally make it heavier. They added parasitic mass. They anchored the port side down to stop the starboard side from rising. It is a linebacker wearing ankle weights to stay balanced. This is the heavy price of being a mutant. So, here is the thesis. Here is the question that defines the strategy of 2026. Why does the United States send a ship that lists to the right? Why send a Frankenstein vessel? one that drags dead iron through the water to the most dangerous choke point on Earth. Because war is not a beauty pageant. When the stealth wears off and the runways are craters, you don't need perfection, you need vengeance. The Lincoln is there to pick the lock. The Bush is coming to kick the door down. To understand why the George H.W. Bush is the linchpin of this operation, we have to strip away the glamour of the F-35 and look at the gritty reality of sustainment. We have to analyze the triangle of destruction that the U.S. Navy is trying to build. First, let's drill deeper into the failure point of the F-15E Strike Eagle. Operation Agile Spartan relies on the concept of ACE, Agile Combat Employment. The theory is that you disperse your jets to small, rough airfields to avoid missile attacks. It sounds smart, but it is a logistical nightmare. An F-15E burns 30,000 pounds of fuel per mission. It drops 10 tons of ordnance. You cannot supply that kind of volume to a dozen scattered desert airstrips indefinitely. Eventually, the logistics chain snaps, and the moment the Iranian missile forces, the high-altitude wall, lock onto those coordinates, the land-based air power is neutralized. The hammer on the ground is glass. It breaks. Second, look at the limitations of the Abraham Lincoln. The Lincoln is operating in the stand-in role. Its primary weapon is the F-35C from VMF A314. This aircraft is designed to penetrate the Bavar 373 air defense network. To do that, it must be clean. No external fuel tanks, no external missiles. Everything is tucked inside the fuselage to maintain that microscopic radar cross-section. This creates a volume trap. The F-35 can kill a specific radar site. It can assassinate a specific command bunker, but it cannot wipe out an armored division. It cannot sink a swarm of 200 fast attack craft. It lacks the magazine depth. It is a sniper rifle. You don't use a sniper rifle to stop a riot. This is the gap. The US Navy has the eyes, the Lincoln, and the power, the F-15, but they lack the sustainable mass. Enter the George H.W. Bush. This ship brings Carrier Air Wing 7, CVW-7, the heavy wing. Look at the flight deck of CVN-77. You will not see a single F-35C. You will see rows of FA-18EF Super Hornet Block III. To the amateur, this looks like a downgrade. Why use the old jet? To the strategist, this is the solution. Because the Lincoln is already in the theater providing stealth coverage, the Bush does not need to hide. The Super Hornets on CVN-77 operate in beast mode. They utilize every single external hardpoint on the wings. They are not carrying 2 bombs internally, they are carrying 10 bombs externally. They are flying with extended range fuel tanks. They are not snipers, they are dump trucks. They provide the volume of fire that the F-35 cannot. And most importantly, CVN-77 is the Indestructible Airfield. It runs on 2 Westinghouse A4W nuclear reactors. It moves at 30+ knots. It cannot be targeted by the pre-programmed ballistic missiles that threaten the F-15s in Qatar. It brings its own runway. It brings its own city. It is strategic redundancy. If the air bases burn, the Bush keeps launching. If the Lincoln runs out of stealth munitions, the Bush keeps hammering with conventional steel. The Pentagon is building a kill box. Lincoln is the eye. F-15 is the land hammer. Bush is the sea hammer. It is a triad. Remove one leg, and the structure falls. Add CVN-77, and you have a cage that the enemy cannot escape. But let's go back to the machine itself. I called CVN-77 a mutant. That wasn't a metaphor. This ship is a collection of engineering anomalies that prove just how difficult it is to push the boundaries of naval physics. If you look at the waterline of CVN-77, you will see something that exists on no other US aircraft carrier, a massive, protruding bulb extending forward from the hull. This is the Bulbous Bow. It is standard on commercial supertankers, but for the US Navy, it was a radical experiment. Here is the fluid dynamics principle: destructive interference. When a standard bow cuts through the water, it creates a bow wave. This wave is energy, wasted energy. It creates drag that pulls the ship back. The bulb is designed to force a secondary wave of water up and over the bow. Mathematically, this secondary wave is exactly 180 degrees out of phase with the primary bow wave. Peak meets trough. They collide. They cancel each other out. The water flattens. The drag coefficient drops. The result is massive amounts of lift, buoyancy, and a significant increase in fuel efficiency for the reactor cores. But physics demands a trade-off. This bulb changes the center of buoyancy. It alters the hydrostatic stability of the hull. This is the root of the list. The ship fights its own efficiency. It is so buoyant forward that it becomes unstable laterally when loaded unsymmetrically. We traded stability for speed. We accepted the flaw to get the performance. Look closer at the superstructure. On a standard Nimitz class like the Eisenhower, the island is a massive block of steel bristling with spinning antennas. To a radar wave, that is a corner reflector. It screams, "I am here." CVN-77 changed the signature. Look at the island. It is smaller. It is moved further aft. The clutter of rotating radars is gone, replaced by a composite mass structure that absorbs energy rather than reflecting it. The navigation bridge windows are armored glass, installed at a specific downward angle. Why? To deflect the incoming radar pulse down into the ocean, killing the return signal. CVN-77 is not invisible. You cannot hide 100,000 tons completely, but it significantly reduces the radar horizon. It forces the enemy to come closer to get a firing solution. It proves that we were trying to evolve the hull form before we even had the new technology to fill it. The world obsesses over radar, but in the Persian Gulf, the real killer hides below the thermal layer. The Iranian Kilo-class submarine. It is a diesel-electric hole in the water, silent, deadly. Against a submarine, a carrier is usually a mobile factory. It is loud. The cavitation from the screws, the propellers, usually sounds like a freight train underwater. Cavitation is the enemy. When a propeller blade slices through water at high speed, the pressure on the trailing edge drops so low that the water boils. It creates vacuum bubbles. When those bubbles collapse, they explode. Shockwaves, noise. CVN-77 fights this with geometry. It uses 4 bronze propellers, but the blade design is a radical departure from the previous 9 ships. The geometry is optimized to cut the water rather than tear it. It delays the onset of cavitation. The tactical result? It does not make the ship silent. That is impossible. But it defeats the enemy's math. It reduces the detection radius. Instead of hearing the carrier from 50 miles away, the Iranian submarine commander might only hear a vague rumble at 20 miles. It forces the enemy to come closer to verify the target, and when they come closer, they enter the kill zone of our destroyer escorts. CVN-77 uses silence as a trap. But here is where the Frankenstein reality hurts us. CVN-77 has the body of the future, stealth features, bulbous bow, but it has the heart of the past. It is powered by 2 Westinghouse A4W reactors. These are 1970s technology. They generate 260,000 shaft horsepower. That is enough to move the ship, but it is not enough to power the future. The new Ford-class ships use Bechtel A1B reactors that generate 3 times the electrical power. Why does this matter? Lasers, railguns, directed energy weapons. Those weapons eat electricity. CVN-77 has hit its energy ceiling. It has no electrical overhead. It cannot mount the massive lasers required to burn down drone swarms instantly. It relies on missiles. It relies on its escorts. This is the tragedy of the transitional model. It is the peak of the old world, staring at the new world, but unable to cross the threshold. It is a king that needs guards because it cannot hold the new sword. So, if the ship cannot power its own lasers, how does it survive a saturation attack? How does it stop 500 drones without going bankrupt firing 500 missiles? It outsources the violence. It brings the electronic wall. Look at the escort sailing alongside CVN-77. The USS Nitze, the USS James E. Williams. Look at the superstructure. You see those massive, bulbous protrusions on the side of the bridge? The sailors call them muffin tops. The enemy calls them blackout. This is the ANSL Q-32V7, SEWIP Block III. In the past, electronic warfare was passive. It was about listening. SEWIP Block III is active. It is a weapon. It uses AESA, Active Electronically Scanned Array technology, to fire concentrated beams of microwave energy. Here is the war economics. An SM-2 interceptor missile costs $2 million. An Iranian Shahed drone costs $20,000. If you shoot missiles at drones, you lose the war financially before the first week is over. SEWIP changes the math. It does not use ammunition, it uses electricity. It targets the guidance circuits of the incoming drone. It fries the motherboard. It severs the control link. It creates an infinite magazine. As long as the destroyer has fuel to run its generators, it can keep shooting. It burns the swarm out of the sky without expending a single kinetic interceptor. That is defense. Now let's talk about offense. CVN-77 launches the EA-18G Growler from VAQ-140, the Patriots. Hanging under the wings of these jets is the ANA LQ-249, Next Generation Jammer Midband, NGJMB. Old jammers used vacuum tubes. They were omnidirectional. They were like turning on a flashlight in a dark room. You blinded the enemy, but they knew exactly where you were. The NGJMB uses gallium nitride chips. It is a sniper rifle of energy. It can form high-power, pencil-thin beams of jamming energy. It can target multiple specific radars simultaneously. It doesn't just create noise, it inserts false targets. It rewrites the enemy's reality. The Lincoln uses stealth to hide from radar. The Bush uses the Growler to burn the radar's retina. It clears the path for the heavy bombers. And for the ultimate threat, the Iranian Fatah hypersonic missile. The escorts carry the SM-6 Dual 2. This missile does what others cannot. It intercepts in the terminal phase, inside the atmosphere. It uses a high-explosive fragmentation warhead, not a hit-to-kill kinetic vehicle. Why? Because hitting a maneuvering target moving at Mach 15 is like shooting a bullet with a bullet while blindfolded. Fragmentation increases the odds. It creates a cloud of shrapnel in the path of the hypersonic weapon. It turns the sky into a minefield. Now, we assemble the machine. We have the components. How do they execute the mission? This is the flush and crush doctrine. It begins with the USS Abraham Lincoln, the F-35C's launch. They push deep into Iranian airspace, but they do not transmit. They are in passive mode. They use their sensors to soak up electromagnetic emissions. They find the mobile missile launchers hiding in the mountains. They find the radar sites. They are the flush. They are the silent hunters. The F-35C gets a lock, but it has only 2 heavy bombs. It cannot waste them on a low-value target. So, it transmits the coordinates. It uses the NTCDL network, Tactical Common Data Link, which was upgraded on CVN-77 in 2024. This is the digital backbone. It moves terabytes of targeting data in milliseconds. The data jumps from the F-35 to the E-2D Hawkeye, to the George H.W. Bush, on the deck of the Bush. The Jolly Rogers of VFA 103 are waiting. Their Super Hornets are heavy. They launch. They do not enter the high threat zone. From hundreds of miles away, from the safety of the standoff range, they fire. They unleash a volley of AGM-88 GAAR, GM, ERS to blind the enemy radars, and AGM-158 CLRASMS to break the enemy fleet. The missiles fly autonomously. They follow the electronic path cleared by the Growlers. They strike the coordinates painted by the F-35s. The F-35 points the finger. The Super Hornet pulls the trigger. This is networked lethality. Before we close the ledger, a brief message. Creating this level of analysis, decoding the physics of war, is a battle against the noise. The algorithm favors the simple and the loud. It tries to bury complexity. So, if you respect the engineering and value the truth, don't just watch in stealth mode. Toggle your transponder to on. Hit that subscribe button. Prove that intelligence still matters. And if you're with us, type proud in the comments. Now, look at the beast one last time. In a world obsessed with the next generation, with clean lines, perfect stealth, and digital sterile warfare, the USS George H.W. Bush stands alone. It is not the perfect machine. It is a mutant. It fights its own geometry. It drags hundreds of tons of dead iron in its belly just to keep its head above water. It is a Frankenstein design, stitched together from the lessons of the past and the dreams of the future. But there is a strange, violent beauty in that imperfection. War is not clean. War is not a simulation. War is chaos. And in the chaos, you don't always want the delicate surgeon with the scalpel. Sometimes, you want the brawler. You want the thing that has scars, the thing that has to fight just to stay upright. This ship is more than steel. It is a memory. Deep inside the skin of the hull, there is a sealed chamber called the Tribute Room. It holds the original flight logs of Lieutenant George H.W. Bush. It holds the model of his TBM Avenger, the torpedo bomber he flew when he was shot down. It serves as a constant reminder to the crew that technology may change, but the price of freedom remains the same. It is the only carrier in the fleet that is also a shrine. So let the Lincoln be the sleek, invisible future. Let it be the flash of lightning that strikes from nowhere. The Bush is something else entirely. It is the heavy, grinding, unstoppable reality of American industrial power. It is the rolling thunder, and the thunder has finally arrived.